The competitive scene for CS has grown exponentially since Global Offensive's release and subsequent updates, and although many new maps have been added, there seems to be a recurring theme that hasn't shown any signs of changing. For the past while, the maps with the highest pick rate and most popularity are typically that of the Diffuse game mode. Dust 2, Inferno, Mirage, Nuke, you get the idea here. But what about the game mode Counter-Strike was originally known for and the maps made for it? Let's talk about the Hostage Rescue Gamemode in Counter-Strike, how it started, how it's changed, and why it seems to be consistently losing popularity. The Hostage Gamemode itself needs no introduction at this point. The Ts have to defend their captured hostages while the CTs need to go in and rescue them. Simple as that. Hostage Rescue has been around since the earliest beta version of the original Half-Life Counter-Strike mod. In fact, at this point, the infamous bomb defusal game mode CS is so well known for, well, technically didn't even exist yet. The only official option players had back then was Hostage Rescue, up until Beta 4 when Defuse was initially released. In the early days of the Hostage game mode, each map was to feature a maximum of 5 hostages for the CTs to rescue. The typical amount for each map was around 3 to 5 for each scenario, which continued through most later iterations of CS. Now, in these earlier versions, the Hostage mode had a few flaws to say the least. Up until Beta 4, the CTs wouldn't be able to win by rescuing the hostages, instead only receiving a monetary bonus for each hostage rescued. They still had to eliminate the enemy team on top of this. The CTs would also have to manually interact with each hostage at the extraction area in order to have them rescued. Admittedly, not a large drawback, but added an extra unnecessary component to the process. Past Beta 4, the CTs would win if they either eliminated the Ts or if they at least had half the hostages rescued, which makes sense from a standpoint of realism, but obviously opened the door to some unbalanced gameplay. For example, if the map had 5 hostages, the CTs would technically need to rescue at least 3 of them in order to win. In the original CS and CSS, the CTs would interact with each hostage, which would have them follow the player. While sounding fine in theory, the hostage pathfinding was quite abysmal. As they would sprint behind the rescuing CT, bumping into every wall, piece of furniture, or player in their way. But rescuing the hostages actually wasn't even that common despite being the whole objective. CTs would often just seek to eliminate the enemy team instead of having to accomplish the harder task of rescuing multiple hostages. On top of this, the Ts could simply kill all the hostages, making it impossible for the CTs to win the round by rescuing them entirely, which was later fixed in a beta version when a kick penalty was added. Just imagine for a second if the CTs could blow up the bomb sites in defuse mode. Yeah, it wouldn't really be too fair. For Global Offensive, the hostage mode received some changes to make it a bit more balanced and appealing. Now the CTs only had to rescue a single hostage to win the round, because screw the other hostage, one is good enough. Each CT could now bring out only one hostage at a time as they had to carry them, receiving a mobility penalty in the process. Along with this, there was now a delay for picking up the hostage that could be shortened with the Hostage Rescue Kit, similar to the kit in Diffuse mode. This did play a role in balancing the mode a bit. Instead of having to search for multiple hostages, the CTs could possibly sneak in one side of an area, grab a hostage, and quickly move out. But then Valve also decided to add a randomization element, where the hostage spawns would be randomly chosen based on a few set locations in the map. I don't exactly know why, but once again, this would be like the bomb sites in Diffuse being randomized each round, which sounds absolutely horrible. As to the question of why Diffuse became so much more popular, well, there's a number of factors at play here. First of all, the mode is much more balanced by nature. 5 versus 5 with 2 bomb sites on a well-made map meant the CTs would have to split up to guard each site. Even with the defensive advantage, they could quickly become overrun by the Ts, who in turn would plant the bomb. At this point, the roles would reverse, as now the remaining CTs had a limited amount of time to retake the site and defuse the bomb. This allowed for each round to be dynamic in the way they played out, and the amount of strategies that could be utilized by each team, but for the Hostage Rescue mode, this wasn't so much of a factor. Virtually all hostage maps had the Ts spawning directly beside the group of hostages, meaning little to no setup time was needed, and due to the enclosed spaces often given to the areas where the hostages were kept, it gave the Ts a significant defensive advantage. Take a map like Office, for example, where the Ts and hostages are relegated to the back corner of the office, with only 2 ways of entry. Or Italy, where pretty much the same is true. The hostages are kept in a small building in the opposite corner of the map. And honestly, really any other official hostage rescue map, Assault, Siege, Militia, or going back to even older CS versions, Havana, Estate, and 747. All these maps featured extremely enclosed spaces for the hostages to be held and were an all-around pain to attack as a CT. There is a point to be made that once the CTs rescue a hostage, that there is a similar role reversal like in the defuse mode, where the Ts now have to make sure the hostage isn't brought to the rescue zone. But in truth, it never really worked out that way. Since all of the hostages were in one central area, the Ts didn't really need to worry about rotations or even any sort of aggressive playstyle, often picking a corner or window and simply waiting for the CTs to get caught in one of the few meat grinder laneways leading to their enclosed space. Due to this, most rounds won by the CTs in hostage mode are typically just won by the Ts being eliminated. Very rarely will they even go for the hostages unless the opportunity arises. So in short, the true objective of hostage rescue kind of became the secondary focus. Most players would just target eliminating the opposite team instead of rescuing the hostages, as it was just much more viable. As to the other question of can hostage rescue be fixed, well, this is a bit of a hard one. While I'd love to think that I'd have a simple answer that could solve over 2 decades worth of balancing issues, unfortunately, that's a bit above my pay grade and mental capabilities. But based upon its current terms, there is a rather simple change that could make the hostage mode a bit more viable and appealing to a wider range of players. That would be to have the 2 hostages on the map separated to different locations, of course also removing the randomization element added in CSGO. This would allow the mode to function more on the fundamentals of defuse, where now the Ts would still have the defensive advantage, but the CTs could also have a fighting chance to overpower them and rescue a hostage. There are a few hostage maps that have done something similar in the past, the first one that comes to mind being Rush from CSGO's Operation Breakout in 2014. The hostage locations were still randomized, but they were split up a bit between different small buildings. Still close together, but far enough to provide a bit of space between. The more recent Insurgent 2 did something similar as well. But I don't deny that this probably wouldn't solve all the issues. Like I said, if it were so simple, Valve would have done it themselves a long time ago. It's less of an idea of changing the game mode itself, and more trying to stick to some fundamental ideas when designing the map. So while the issues present in the hostage mode are with the game mode itself, there is definitely an equal role played in map design from the beginning. While I think the mode is unique and still fun if I'm being honest, it obviously has been neglected as time has gone on. The pro scene for competitive CS has pretty much entirely surrounded the defuse mode throughout its history, so naturally most of the game and map development is catered to that. Personally, I do like the hostage rescue mode even with its inherent issues in balancing, but I will also say it works much better in a more casual gameplay setting rather than in a competitive one, which seems to be the philosophy Valve has been going with for the past while. At least in my estimation, seeing more official and community hostage maps in upcoming updates and operations for CS2 would be a welcome change of pace to both casual and maybe even competitive. Even though it's still as fun as always, it obviously hasn't stood the test of time competitively. But I don't think that's a reason to give up on it just yet.